Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Today's been all about building community around business equality, and so I'm especially delighted to guide us through the last part of our program, which is our town hall. This is our opportunity to come together to explore some of your questions, your concerns, and indeed maybe to share some of your solutions. We have time on the clock, or at least we should have in a few minutes, and we have roaming microphones, so we are really excited to hear from you. We just ask that you introduce yourselves and your company or your organization. We're really excited to have this time to be in dialogue with you. So joining us in conversation are Sydney Benavides from the League of the United Latin American Citizens, who is, of course, there's Sydney, can speak about immigration. We have Joy Boo Lamwini from Algorithmic Justice League about AI. Rebecca Cantor from Embellis from the world of education. And we also have Dr. Mary Schmidt-Candle from Spelman, also on education. Staff Sergeant Shane Ortega on transgender rights. And finally, Carolyn Tastad from P&G North America, who is one of our corporate leaders on equality. And then, of course, we have me, Karen Toulon, Senior Editor, Bloomberg, who's going to be sitting here on this little stool all by myself, like I'm on time out, which is kind of fun. I will probably get up and wander, so that's what I do. So I will probably do that. Indeed, I think I'll do that very shortly because this is sort of odd. But to get us started, Dr. Campbell, you've been an educator for about 30 years. We were chatting a bit backstage in the green room. Did you hear anything today? You've been here listening all day. Did you hear anything today that kind of has forced you to kind of think about something new or think about something in a different way?
Yeah, I thought Joy's presentation was phenomenal, right? And the reason for that is that I think when we think about science or technology, math, we think of it as logical, rational, and objective, right? And what I learned is that it can be inflected by who's in the room and what who's in the room has to say about what is happening. So that's incredible insight into why you have to have diversity in the room, because otherwise you can get huge distortions.
Okay, great. We're going to go right into questions. Who has a question? All you have to do is just raise your hand. Okay, right over here. Okay, and then over here.
Hi, I'm Carol Watson. I work at Diversity Best Practices, and excited to see you, Joy. We talk a lot about AI. I heard about the new center they have at Stanford around human-centered AI to really get ahead of it. What else are you seeing in terms of solutions? I think people are alarmed. Even in the disability side, there's a lot of concern around facial recognition, and the iPhone doesn't work with my Face ID.
Right.
So you need to talk to them too. But want to hear what you're hearing about solutions around AI.
Absolutely. Well, we have to think about legislation when we're talking about the governance of AI, not just in the US, but also internationally. Right now, we actually have bipartisan support for the Commercial Face Recognition Act that's being pushed. And there's a problem with it. They talk about the need for affirmative consent, which is to say, I should know if my face data is being gathered, right? So if I'm going to be at a hiring process that's using facial analysis, I should have the option to say yes or no. People were talking about the Facebook 10-year challenge as a hashtag. But for the last 10 years, we've been uploading our photos and tagging them, giving Facebook all of our face print information. So it's important that we actually start having regulation, and we have something that's on the books that says we'll have affirmative consent, but how affirmative consent is being defined is there'll be a notice. Where's the affirmation, right? So I think it's good that we're starting to see legislative pushes, but we have to make sure that the laws aren't just being written by lobbyists. In Massachusetts and also Washington, you have bills that have a bit more teeth, so I think those are good starting points. Other organizations to look at would be AI Now, which is based here in New York at NYU, where they're doing algorithmic assessment impacts that companies can use and governments can use as well when you're thinking about procuring AI systems? How do you make sure that they're equitable, and how do you make sure that we're including more people in the decision-making processes?
Question over here, and then we're going to go over here.
Hi, Danielle Jarneau with Expand Research. Well, first of all, thank you for a lovely day. It's just amazing. So something that struck me in the Me Too panel, and this question is really for anyone who wants to answer it. While I think that yes, there's been progress. As a woman working in a male-dominated field, whether it's consulting or finance. I was just on the phone listening to a friend of mine crying last night about all of the the underlying discrimination that is still out there, and it's highly unresolved. And we talk about how far financial services has come. It hasn't. So I guess my question is, while there are a lot of firms doing it right, there are many more that are doing it wrong. I guess for the people who are stuck in those firms, how do we help them to move forward, just on the microaggressions that they suffer every day?
You know what, I think something that we were chatting back in the green room, and Rebecca, you had an interesting comment on the carrot and the stick. Perhaps you can kick us off with that.
I would not proclaim to be an expert in anything finance or consulting or Me Too related, but the simple thing I've understood is incentives drive behaviors, and so do consequences. And I think one of the challenges I have personally with Me Too and how it's manifest across Silicon Valley, which is the context that I operate in, is there's really not a lot of punishment and there's really not a lot of incentive. And what I mean by that is, you don't get more than brownie points for having a really diverse team. In fact, if you were in an acquisition standpoint and someone was looking at your team as an asset, they're assigning a premium for the Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Dartmouth and Duke and PhDs and master's degrees. They're not assigning a premium for the fact that you took a chance on a kid who grew up in Compton and happened to be a great employee. So there's no real valuation bump that would be the monetary translation of us ascribing value to diversity and inclusion in our companies. And there's, the takedowns of founders from Silicon Valley in the press, but they often turn around and raise $100 million for the next thing. And raising $100 million, if you're a woman, is non-trivial. There are like 5 of them who have done it. But for a guy, if you're still able to bro out and, guys are willing to say, well, he was still a good guy, he just, made a mistake, great. That's not really reinforcing this message that your behaviors matter. It's reinforcing capitalism above all.
Yeah, please.
So this is relevant to me because I'm actually doing a Me Too panel in support of our women when they speak in Texas, but from an indigenous perspective. We're having an Indigenous Peoples Conference. And so when we talk about accountability, that also means that as men, self-reflective, that when a woman speaks up within your organization, that it is inherently your responsibility to elevate that voice in support of the directives or intention or however that she sees that needs to be addressed. So in this bro culture, it's inherently the responsibility of those professional men to have these intense, very face-forward conversations with their employees. And if they aren't, then they need to be held accountable. And so I'm not exactly sure how that would construct, like that accountability would be played out, but that is exactly what needs to happen. Men in patriarchy only listen to other men, unfortunately. So that's how we expand the conversation.
Can I just add something that you sparked as I thought about it? A colleague of mine, Deanna, always says we have to be able to hold 2 things in our minds at the same time. The one is that the majority of men do not behave badly. Similarly, the majority of women do not make up these stories. And we have to acknowledge that both of those things are true. And so I love Jamila's quote where she said, I might not get it exactly right, and I don't know who said this either, but those who come from a position of privilege see equality as oppression. And for me, it just triggered this conversation in my mind that says we have to continue to push dialogue. We have to continue to have more and more dialogue so that we can understand what this means. And I think we've had the same conversation in our company, even relative to Me Too. Where is the standard of behavior and what does that mean? And when it moves, how do we make sure we're moving with it? And how do we make sure that our interpretation of no tolerance is correct? And how do we make sure, and we're having these conversations. We're having these conversations very openly to make sure that every one of our employees has an opportunity to come to work in a safe environment every day. And so there is this notion of, I love this this juxtaposition of women aren't making this up and men are not typically abusers, and you have to believe both of those truths. And I think that, again, dialogue can help us move forward.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Paige. I'm a filmmaker, and I also founded and I run a lab for women filmmakers to help them put together packages to get their films and their voices out into the culture, because I think it's very important for women to have their voices out there. Only 4% of the films that are made in this country were made by women. So here's my question. As we stand here in kind of this palace of finance and data, right? And everybody here has something to do with business. How do we move the money, which is in the hands, I've heard today, 73% of it is in the hands of women. How do we move that money to women and folks of color and differently abled folks within business so that we can have a bigger impact in the culture? How do we do that? I mean, these events are fabulous, but how do we move that money into where it can have a real impact?
So wealth is not my specialty, but I will say this. I think in education, I'm at a liberal arts college for women, for Black women. I think we have to be very candid and very explicit about talking to women about building wealth. Somehow we think that, the good work shouldn't be tainted by those conversations. And I think we have to get that out of our heads. We have to have courses on financial literacy, making sure our women understand investment, how to structure their wealth, how to keep it, how to grow it. All of those have to be conversations that we have to have at the outset, because if we're talking about power, we also have to be talking about wealth.
And I would just add that as a person living in a democracy, the fact that you can give to a political campaign and elect more women is somewhere where I think we can also place an increased power of women being at the table, creating and making policy at all levels of our government.
So we have to stop being shy about money.
Yes.
I think there's also, millennials, I think, champion this to a degree, though. There are bigger, more pressing topics than our personal wealth at stake for the future of humanity and all the existential threats that we face. And I think with that in mind, there's a real question of, is the American priority to continue amassing personal wealth under this notion that all tides rise? Has that been working? Or is it time to think about, our stock market doesn't just have to be a ticking tally of dollars. It can include other inputs to our functions of how we evaluate success. And the problem is, when it all comes down to dollars and cents, the stories we celebrate, sometimes we like a good story that has some impact, but really we like all stories that have a lot of money. And it's time to confront that and to think, whether you're a woman or a man or black or white or whatever color, I think there are some causes that are big enough in our time and our age that it's more valuable for us to reward and laud some types of work over others. And I think America is very afraid of judging some life pursuits as being lesser than others. But I think it's time to probably put aside some of those fears of judging and being accused of being bossy or pushing people towards certain ends, and thinking instead, have we been glorifying just amassing wealth more than progressing humanity?
Question up front.
Hi, good afternoon. This is for Dr. Schmidt-Campbell. As a proud HBCU alum, I think Andrew Gillum and Stacey Abram are a testament to the legacy of HBCUs. And as a leader in STEM education at Spelman, what do you say to employers who say there's an issue in the pipeline?
There's no issue about the pipeline. And I'm glad you raised the issue of HBCUs. Again, if you go back to the NSF charts and you look at the top 30 colleges that are sending students off to get those PhDs in STEM, men and women, half of them, more than half of them, are HBCUs. We have 3% of the population, 32%, we produce 32% of the STEM graduates. We have done this year after year after year after year. We've always, they know where to go. There are 100 of us all over the country. If they were serious, they would show up and they would be there interviewing our students. So it really isn't, it's very hard to swallow this notion of pipeline, but it is about understanding how to see and understanding how to assess and evaluate and being very honest about that. Thank you for asking that question.
Question over here.
I don't know how many of you may have a Pinterest account, but how would you feel if you knew that 81% of the user base for Pinterest are women, which means Pinterest's wealth has been built on the backs of women, yet on the IPO, they haven't picked one woman or one minority firm to be a co-manager or a book runner in the deal? Would you still keep your Pinterest account open, yes or no?
I don't have Pinterest. Sorry.
But that does get to a good question about as well, there was the last panel, the panel before, I think it was talking about media and whether the consumer ultimately makes the decisions about the films that are made. You know, can the consumer actually determine what types of movies are actually produced? And some people would say yes, and others will say, at the end of the day, those movies are made. You get to see that which has already been made. Can we really affect change as a consumer after certain decisions are already made? Question.
So I think increasingly consumers are voting, though. I think exactly to your point, you know the information, you know what it is, and whatever we do doesn't matter, but you know what you're going to do. And that's your call, and you get to make that vote, and you can vote with your mouse or with your phone or with your feet. And I think that happens more and more. And so whether it's a movie that somebody's making and our consumer's going to go to it, whether it's advertising and consumers are going to vote for the product or not, consumers have a voice that they are using more frequently. I think stakeholders today, including our employees, and we've said this so many times at our company, care about what's behind the company or the brand. That goes to your question about Pinterest. They care who the company is. They care what the brands stand for. They care how the company operates. They care about the company's representation. That's important to some share owners, maybe not all. It's important to employees. It's important to our partners, our customers, and stakeholders and suppliers. And so business, and certainly we feel this way, business has a responsibility and an opportunity to make a stand and to do good things in that world. It doesn't have to be legislated. It doesn't have to be required, but we have a chance to do better things. So, whether it's we were talking about wealth, but whether it's in filmmakers, we don't have to have it legislated what kind of a slate we have, but we can put together a program, which we've done called Free the Bid, that says, I will require diverse candidates on this slate of every producer that I sign up for an advertising program that I'm making, because I want to make sure my bid is open and it's not biased. And there's so many things that we can do without anybody telling us to do it, but just because we know it's important to our share owners, our stakeholders, and it's important to the people that we serve, consumers and employees. And I think that's a responsibility that all businesses have, and I think many are taking that responsibility seriously.
And do you think more companies are seeing this as an opportunity rather than a bit of homework, an obligation, something that they kind of have to do?
There's probably both, but there's a part of me that I don't care for what reason they do it. I care that they do it. And I'm really, for us, we see it as an opportunity. We see it as something that's so important to people and the community and consumers that we serve. And I think that's great. If other people are doing it to catch up or care, tag along, great.
I would add that coming from a Latino civil rights organization point of view, part of my job is also going to the CEOs of the company and saying, your board lacks diversity, and taking a stand on behalf of my community. I know that many of the other organizations like the National Urban League, the NAACP, also take those strong roles and take the position of power that we have to make sure to elevate that. And the other things that we do is that when a company is not doing something right, we call them to the carpet. And we'll do it privately, but if we don't see action being taken, then that shifts us to go into a completely different position to make sure that there's more public awareness about what a company is doing wrong. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is advance all of our communities. And if a company is not being held accountable by an individual, and just let me remind you the power that you give away, the power that you have as an individual to not only shut down your Pinterest account, but then to write a letter to the CEO saying why you're shutting that account and have others sign on to that letter. It's incredible. And so as a community, as individuals, we also have to understand the power that we hold internally to create this change as well.
And building on that, and as far as calling out, somebody mentioned earlier Stanford's AI initiative. We had to call that out because even though the people who created it said it's about diversity and making sure that diversity is reflected in the future of AI, of the 121 faculty they had, less than 20% were women. There were no Black faculty there. This is at Stanford, which has a lot of well-qualified people who could have been there. And after we made a bit of a Twitter storm around it, there have been some changes. A lot of my work with the Algorithmic Justice League is about calling out, but as you saw in the presentation, it led to these gaps being closed, and sometimes it's inadvertent. When you look at what happened at Stanford, they're like, oh, this is embarrassing, but we didn't look. And when you look at it, it's so obvious. So I think it's up to us to continue to call these things out, but then also to hold people accountable, which is why we do the follow-up audits, see where you are.
We have a question. We have a question over here, and then all the way in the back. Okay, over here.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Jesse Ash with Greener Media, and thank you, Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell. I'm a Tisch alum. This question is for Cindy and the rest. In terms of having difficult conversations, my wife's an immigrant. She's applying for a green card. We have the data around how immigration reform is needed desperately when, administrations are doing horrible, horrible things out there. How have you been able to change the other side, right? Because we're here all in a liberal bubble. New York City is a haven for progressives. When you're out there trying to do the good work that you're doing outside of the bubble, how have you been able to change someone's mind who doesn't share your ideals and your values?
Thank you for that question. And I think it's such an important question because we also have to have the ability to step into the other person's shoe and understand what the reality is for them. I will tell you, a few weeks ago, we took a beating in the media because we decided to meet with the White House and meet specifically with Jared Kushner to discuss immigration. This was one day before the federal government reopened again. And for our friends on the very left side, this was LULAC giving legitimacy to a precedent that by all means has declared war on immigrants across this country. And for us, it was important, one, significant, because LULAC, as an organization that turned 90 years old on February 17th, we've met with every single president since President Kennedy because we respect the office of the presidency and the importance of being at the table, continue to raise our voice and state our position. And one of the things that we addressed was, why are we not looking at the root cause? Why are we not thinking of a Marshall Plan similar to World War II, where we invested heavily in Europe to make sure that those democracies were thriving, that people could stay in place, that they had an education, that they had a job to go to? And this was actually an idea that is actually being had behind a lot of closed doors in terms of how do we address the root cause. And then in terms of the issue, it's not easy. It's not easy if you're a dreamer and you have a political party saying, okay, we may give you a free pass, but in return, we want to deport your parents. And you're being asked to choose, and you're being almost held hostage. And I will tell you that part of it, I mean, there's a reason why we haven't had immigration policy in close to 30 years. And it's because it's a complex issue. It's an issue that has been politicized. And let's be real, immigration is not a Latino issue. Immigration is an American issue. It's an issue that belongs to America. And so to your question, we need reforms. We haven't changed our quota systems since the 1960s, yet our demographics, our demands, our consumer habits have changed. And so there is a lot that this group can do. You can certainly write to your legislator. You can make sure that, for those personal stories, that they understand how long it's taken. I have a friend who has 2 sisters who are in Mexico, and they've been waiting for more than 17 years to be able to come to the U.S. legally. There is no miracle door that exists for a person who's undocumented to walk through to become legal. It does not exist. And this is where I think the American public can win the hearts, can change the minds of our own elected officials.
Cindy, you threw out a stat when we were in the green room. Can you share that with the audience?
And so in thinking of political power, and again, we give too often as women, as communities of color, we give our power away. And this is where data matters. Every 30 seconds, a Latino in the US is turning 18. Every 30 seconds. That means that every single year, we have 1 million Latino new voters going into our electoral system. What does this mean for elections at the local, at the state, and at the federal level? And so knowing our power, our numbers, understanding the change that we can make as individuals, as collective, as the influencers that we are, is very important.
Great. We have a question in the back.
Hi, my name is Sabrina. I'm from the International Chamber of Commerce at our UN mission. My question is let me take a second. I'm very lucky that in our organization there's been a top-down approach from our Secretary General to be more innovative, to support diversity and younger people specifically. One of the problems that I'm having, because I work on our partnerships, is if I can find a potential partner, I am discouraged from setting up a meeting if it's not with the CEO of the company. And I feel like we're losing out by not being able to take those meetings and not being able to set up those opportunities. So I'm just wondering how to, A, change the minds of the people around me, but also how to navigate the burnout and the feeling like I'm not doing anything.
Interesting question. Carolyn,
Sure, I'll give you a perspective on it. I think that we are too focused on titles, and I think that happens in many cases, right? It happens in board searches as we're trying to get people and more diverse boards, and people will say, but you must be a sitting CEO or you must have this experience. And I think unfortunately as a result of that, we're missing out on tremendous talent and perspective that could be very helpful in board seats. I don't have a solution for it other than if you can find a partner and if you can find somebody within that company, albeit not always the CEO, but somebody who has the authority and the ability to help you make an impact, sometimes that can unlock progress. Because what people are unfortunately too focused on is they assume that the authority and the opportunity to make progress in a company lies with one person. And we all know that that increasingly in today's world is just untrue because the authority has to be distributed in order for us to keep up to the speed and the pace and the volatility of the world that we all live in today. And so my only thought is find somebody who can work with you to make an impact, make that impact, and use that as a case for change.
I am going to take, I'm looking at Shatir. I am not going to take any more questions. I am not, no, I am a fearless warrior woman with a sparkly pen, but I am not that fearless. But I will, okay, very quickly, what have we not taken a question on? Have we just, we're going to be rude, we're going to shout out almost. What is your question on? No, you cannot ask it. You're going to look at me. You're looking at me. The look at the pen. What is your question on? What is it on?
So my question was about voting. I went to Spelman College and I understood how important that process was for us. And I think presidents of college unintentionally become advocates of the voting process as they're mentoring kids who are now first-time voters. So I just wanted to know, Dr. Campbell, is that something that
You are good. Okay, hold on to the.
She's a Spelman woman.
No,
right?
I like her.
Yeah.
I like her. So we're going to
Okay.
hang on to that one, and then no, don't give them the microphone. You give them the microphone, then they move in. Age to discrimination. What do you have, my friend?
How do you get brands behind projects like Slavery at Sea to, get them to use their corporate social responsibility for a good cause?
That's a good one. What is yours on?
The silver economy and older people.
I love that. 'Cause look at this. I love it. Okay. Well, yours is.
Myself from South Africa, I haven't really heard much about white privilege as a term.
Okay.
Well, you talked about that.
I love to talk about colonialism.
Yeah, that's a lot.
love colonialism.
Okay. So we're going to do this very. Okay, Shatir. Okay, we're going to do this very quickly. So what about presidents of universities or any institution where there are young people kind of advocating for a particular political party? How do you feel about that?
So as a not-for-profit, the tax rules prohibit not-for-profits from taking a stand during a campaign one way or another. But what we did, as you should know, during the midterm elections was incredible advocacy in terms of getting students to register, getting out to vote, getting people to the polls, getting involved in the electoral campaign. I think presidents have to be loud advocates for full participation in the process. We have to. Yeah.
Okay. And then it was Silver and Age. I think that kind of falls into something that we both kind of talked about, Carolyn and I. Part of that soft sort of bias that kind of creeps in. It's that patronizing language that kind of can work into some of the assumptions that people can make as they're talking to their staffs, whether it's how old are you, or I was talking about when I was younger. You have to go through all the litany of your qualifications before someone actually believes that you actually are qualified to be in your job, or that kind of thing that starts creeping in, which can be just as I think it's anytime you feel that you're being demeaned or not valued. It's the type of culture that you create in the workplace, and I guess it's creating some place where the culture of managers, employees just make it so that it's just not tolerated.
Yeah,
How do you do
certainly.
that at P&G?
We work very hard to, it's a fundamental value. We work very hard to make sure every individual can show up fully themselves and contributing, because that's what we need, right? We need everybody contributing to their full extent. And that applies to Gen Z, and that applies to people my age. Because I've been at P&G a very, 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 very long time. And that's really important in our culture, that's really important in our company. But we do that by really trying to avoid bias in the workplace? How do we ensure that we see through bias? And I gave some examples of that this morning, and we continue to talk about that. The other thing that's really important, and I'm going to jump to the white privilege, we have to continue to have dialogue. We have to have conversation, and we have to talk about privilege, not uniquely white privilege, privilege and power, and we've got to put it in the middle of the room and have a conversation about it. Because until we do that, then we don't get at full participation of everybody, whether it's people of color, people with disabilities, people with mental illness. We have to be able to have a conversation so that people build their understanding, build their self-awareness, build their tolerance as part of it, and in doing so, we will have better companies and better results.
I think beyond conversation, the other thing I found in age discrimination going the other way, and it's not that helpful to complain about it on end, but when I am in some of these meetings, when someone does something inappropriate, I think it's in those moments when you have to make people feel really uncomfortable. Like, you just gotta fight fire with fire. And so when, I was at a breakfast, I gave this example when we were backstage, and some guy, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s, I don't know, because I actually wouldn't have asked had he not said, "How old are you?" And I was like, "How old are you?" So I think it's in those micro moments, like, people are really polite, and if you have a call that goes badly because someone's an asshole and you meet their manager later, like, tell them the conversation was awful. Give that feedback, because saying, "Oh, it was nice to meet your call," like, that's not helping anyone, right? I mean, except the person who was the perpetrator. So I think you have to really take those micro moments. I'm not sure that there's like a broader societal upswell past what we're experiencing now that could build up to those. But I think it's those one-on-one moments where it becomes shameful to be a bad actor and you're unafraid to confront people.
We also have to think about age bias within AI as well, and particular areas when we start thinking about precision medicine and precision healthcare. So you want to have the right medicine for the right person at the right time. It wasn't until 1993 that women were even mandated to be part of clinical trials. And if you look at a lot of the clinical data we have, it's of specifically middle-aged white men. Even if you're a middle-aged white man right now, you probably won't always be, right? So if we're thinking about who gets marginalized, it's going to be everybody. So that's just another space when we're applying intersectional lenses, making sure we're also considering age as well.
And when we're having these conversations about ageism and equity, because I like to use the word equity, equity acknowledges in the language of English the position in which people begin and where people need to rise to. So equity. We do need to address the narratives of colonialization, and we need to say exactly what it is, because it began in Europe. And historically speaking, if we're going to have intersectional conversations, we need to know where that came from. We need to know what the doctrine of discovery is and how that proliferated, because everyone now lives on this land, so therefore you are now the American, and my history is your history. There is no difference, right? It impacts the freedoms that everyone gets to experience through and how they are marginalized. So exactly what you were saying, I agree.
And if we're going to talk about colonialism, we need to talk about the new data colonialism that's happening now, where we'll see extractive processes based on the kind of legislative environments that we have. So if you look in Europe, there's the GDPR, General Data Protection regulation that came out that gives EU citizens certain protections with their data rights, including their biometric data. You don't necessarily have those protections in other places. So you have companies in China that are equipping the government of Zimbabwe with surveillance technology using facial analysis in return for something very precious: the data of their citizens. And so like you had the Atlantic slave trade, right, where you took physical bodies, you're now seeing the extraction of digital bodies that's coming in this AI and data colonialism. If you look at Cambridge Analytica, you'll see that they went to South America and they went to Africa first before they came to our elections. And it's not too dissimilar for what happened within medical testing, right? Where you go to Guatemala or you go elsewhere because the regulatory environment is more permissive. So I think we also need to be thinking about data colonialism.
Sorry, I can't help myself. This is also where companies have an opportunity to step up, right? So whether it be the GDPR, the California privacy law that's coming in play January 2020, or there's at least 14 or 15 other countries that are going there. As countries, we don't have to wait for legislation to tell us to do the right thing. And I think that's so important for us to take a stand.
And that is the last word. That is the last word. That is going to be the last word. I'm going to revert now to what I have typed on my nice typed paper. I'm moving back over to my little chair. Yes, I am. Stacy, right? We met earlier. Here I am back on my perch, right? Thank you, everyone, for joining us at our second annual Bloomberg Equality Summit. On behalf of my colleagues at Bloomberg, I'd like to thank our speakers, our final panelists, our moderators for their time and their valuable insights today. A big thank you to our founding sponsor, P&G, who again is also supporting us at our upcoming Bloomberg Equality Summits. We're so very happy in London in May and again in Mumbai in October. And a special thank you to our other sponsors, TPG, Willis Towers Watson, Bank of America, and Invesco QQQ. We could have not done this without you. I'd like to also acknowledge our wonderful crew and staff who are in the back and all over. They've done a wonderful job. And finally, a big thank you to all of you in the audience who've been wonderful and engaged here in New York and globally on live streaming for sharing your time and your talents and your questions with us. You can continue your questions with us. If you get hold of my sparkly pen, you can even do whatever else you want. Through those doors, we have drinks and snacks. Again, it's been a real honor to spend the day with everyone. This is really important to those of us here at Bloomberg. All we can do is keep on talking, asking great questions, assembling really wonderful people, sharing what we know, being honest about what we don't know. And hopefully keep moving forward. Again, thank you so very much. We hope we'll see some of you in London and in Mumbai. Thank you.